Will you indeed sweep away the righteous with the wicked? When I called, you answered me. Lord, teach us to pray as John taught his disciples. There are as many ways to ask a question as there are to pray. And as many of those ways are, even greater are the ways one can be answered. Abraham interrogates God. It is a matter of life and death. It is of utmost importance that they be clear. Will you sweep away the righteous with the wicked? And God answers Abraham. God clarifies God's mercy. God tells Abraham with words what it would take to save these people. In the end, the people are too far gone. No redemption is to be found for this town. And still, it mattered that Abraham asked these questions, that Abraham understood as much as was possible what God would and would not do. Abraham's not the only one who gets to question God. Most of the Psalms and the stories of the Hebrew Scriptures and the Gospels show multiple scenarios where answers are asked and demanded of God. Some receive very clear, specific answers like Abraham in this story. Others receive rather poetic and overwhelming diatribes like Job. Others had to look harder to find answers so uncertain they might have missed them. And all of it was prayer. This is what prayer is, engaging in dialogue with God, communicating our hopes and desires, concerns and questions to the being that created us to know and to be known. We ate the fruit in the garden, and now we want to know. It is our nature. Where the trouble starts is when we start asking questions, certain we know what the answers will be. If we think we know what the answers to our questions are, we run the risk of missing the truth. Asking questions is an act of faith, because in reality, you do not have control over what happens after you ask that question. You do not have control over what the answer is you will receive, or even if you will receive an answer. You can say, I demand an answer as much as you want. You cannot actually make someone answer you. So much less so can you do that with God. You can still ask. Once the words leave your mouth, what happens next is out of your control. You may get an answer that you don't want, or an answer that does not make sense to you. But we believe that God holds love for which God has created, and in that love, a desire to answer questions, a desire to be known by us. So we continue to ask questions, and then we give over control in the answering of our question, in the answering of our prayers to God. And that's pretty hard. Giving up control or the illusion of control is always hard. A part of us knows so much is out of our control, we try to find places where we could control. We ask leading questions. We ask questions where we don't really expect an answer, or we know the answer and we don't like it. It makes us feel safe to think we know what we are going to hear, to think we know what is going to happen to us. And still we continue to ask questions. We ask God for understanding, for faith, for peace, for answers. And perhaps in the asking of the questions, we will find not what we want, but what we need. Jesus comes in and gives us a roadmap for how to start, where to start, how to pray, what to ask for. And step one is acknowledging that we don't have power over the answer. Your will be done on earth and on heaven. Not what I ask of you, but what you give to me. Then we ask for bread, because carbs give us energy. Probably other reasons too. And then we ask for forgiveness for all of what we owe to God and all of what we owe to one another that we have failed to give, our debts. But in doing so, we are forced to acknowledge that if we are to be forgiven, we must learn to forgive. Finally, in this version at least, we ask God to help us avoid temptation. Whether that means we're not presented with temptation or we are no longer controlled by temptation. Well, that's one of the many answers we might get. Jesus goes on to say that our prayers will be answered. Ask and you shall receive. What a lovely sentiment. What he doesn't say is exactly how those questions will be answered, how those prayers will be answered. Maybe we don't give the kid a scorpion instead of an egg, but maybe the kid is thinking, I want a chicken's egg, and we hand them a duck egg. It reminds me of a story that you might have heard. If you are a big fan of The West Wing, like my husband, you've definitely heard this story. They didn't invent it. I think it's one of the ones that goes around, but it's about a man caught in a flood. And he's on top of his home. He's on the roof. It's the only dry spot left. And he's praying. He's so faithful. He's praying to God to come get him, to save him from this flood. And a boat arrives, and the boat says, hey, the water's rising. You got to come with us. We'll take you to safety. And he says, no, my faith is stronger than that. I'm going to keep praying to God. So the boat leaves. And a different boat comes. And they say, come on, man, the water's getting worse. You know, the levee broke. We're not safe. Please come with us. And he says, no, my faith is too strong. I'm going to keep praying for God to save me. And finally, a third boat comes and says, this is it, man. After we leave, there is no one else. And the man says, nope, I trust my prayers. And then he dies. And he goes up to heaven, and in this story, we get to know what happens next. And he says to God, hey, you're real. We're talking right now. And I prayed to you, and I was sure you were going to come for me. Why am I dead? And God says to him, I sent you 3 boats. You can ask God whatever you want, however you want. You can pray to God however makes sense to you. But if you're not careful to be open to the possibility, to the potential realities of God's answers, you might actually miss the boat. So be open, be watchful, be creative. Be ready for the answer to come from whom you might least expect in a form you could never have imagined. And continue to ask the questions.